Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Needens. I am with the Cognitive Care Network here at KU Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. And we're going to have what I think is one of the tough conversations uh, about managing some of these cognitive changes. Tough for the person, tough for you as care partner. And that is the inevitability of the conclusion of driving. And we're going to look at when that is and perhaps how that is and support of the person in this tough transition. I want to say, first of all, that the idea that diagnosis alone dictates driving safety is inaccurate. There are many people that have cognitive impairment that are not diagnosed. And so we see a pretty significant portion of individuals, especially over the age of 80, who continue to attempt to drive and indeed are experiencing cognitive impairment. It is also the case that even if you have a diagnosis, that doesn't necessarily mean you're an unsafe driver. There are people with MCI, early Alzheimer's disease, mild vascular dementia, those kind of things that can continue to drive for a period of time. And that line sometimes is very, very clear and sometimes is a little bit more gray. So why is it that it is inevitable that people conclude driving? Most people think it is wholly based in the idea that people get lost, the wayfinding piece. And indeed, that is part of the concerns that we have as cognitive issues mount. But it is not the only reason why we are concerned about driving. In other words, there are people who can navigate and continue to find their way places that there are still issues and challenges that might lead us to a conclusion that it's time for driving retirement. One of those things is reaction time. So it's not just the cognitive impairment, but also the physical being, and how does that mount in terms of reaction time and ability to adjust. Multitasking becomes difficult, and there is no scenario when you are driving and you are not multitasking. You are observing multiple things at the same time. Visual spatial field is affected. That means depth perception. And we're going to talk about clues in terms of that depth perception when it comes to driving. But that really is about where you are in the environment, whether that be lanes or curbs or cars or intersections or all of those kinds of things. Decision making can be affected at some point in terms of where and is gas needed, how to manage certain challenges, what's needed for safety when one leaves the house, etc. And then this concept of cognitive flexibility. How can you respond? What would the response be in the novel situations, in the unexpected situations like detours or road construction, those kind of things? Do people get confused in those scenarios? So of all of those contributors in terms of cognitive impairment, what might be signs, specific signs of unsafe driving? Really looking and observing how aware they are of other drivers. Are they able to pay attention and manage all those factors of coming from a different direction, of those beside them, etc. Trouble with lane control, depth perception issues, which can look a lot of different ways. For example, how close they are to the car in front of them. Are they too close, or more often what we see is they're way far back, they stop with some distance behind, but not able to navigate some of those issues. More frequent and unexpected braking, which actually also has to do with that visual spatial field. Prolonged time for errands. So there are people who say they are fine, but maybe they went to the hardware store and they were gone extra half an hour than they should have been. And that can give you clues to perhaps they found their way, but perhaps it was not natural for them to find their way. Perhaps they struggled a little bit. Perhaps they got turned around before they realized where they were. So we pay attention to the time frames when people are expected to be gone and when they come back. Errors at intersection, again, that's visual spatial related, pulling into the intersection before they stop or stopping too far back in the intersection at stoplights, etc. Navigating stoplights in general. Are they paying attention to the stoplight changes? Perhaps running through red lights. Mixing up gas and brake pedals. Yes, that happens. And of course, we always want to pay attention to the clues in the very early stage so that we don't get to situations of this nature where we're really in a perilous kind of situation. But absolutely, there have been many documented accidents, some of which injured other people, some of which killed other people, where it was a mix-up between gas and brake pedal. Hitting curbs, again, visual spatial field, failure to observe traffic signs, as we talked about, and that getting confused in those unexpected road work, detour kinds of situations. So here's what I want you to consider. Do you feel safe with the person driving? Actually, have you driven with the person for a while? I talked to many families who have said, no, I don't feel safe, and I haven't driven with them for a long time because I'm not comfortable. Well, if you're not comfortable, they're likely not safe to be behind the wheel and needs to be addressed. If you believe they are safe, the only way to verify that, really, to have a more confident perspective about that, is to ensure you're driving with them, that you're in the passenger seat, they're in the driving seat on a regular basis. So you're really observing some of those changes. Would you allow grandchildren to drive alone with them? Again, as the answer is no, there's some actions that need to be taken. In the equation of safety versus freedom, we really want to support people doing what they can for as long as they can. But with driving, it's not just about one person's safety, it's about public safety. And we have to be attuned to the safety of all. And if you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe having your grandchildren in the car with them, we don't want to risk somebody else's grandchildren. How often are you directing? How many cues per trip are required? I've certainly seen people early on in the disease that were still safe to drive, where, co-pilot in the passenger seat, remember, we're going to turn in a couple of blocks here, we're going to turn at this next corner. But how frequently are you having to do that? And are there other kind of cues that you're giving? Hey, get over a little bit, those kind of things that tell you that there's some visual spatial deficits going on. If something out of the ordinary happened, could rapid adjustments could be made, and have you observed that? And then, I always am interested in gut feelings. Do you know, at least in your head, in your gut, that driving is not safe now? And if so, what stops you from acting on that belief? And oftentimes it's about fear of someone's reaction. It's about you don't think they'll listen. Sometimes it's about they are the driver for the family, that it would alter lots of lives rather than one or two. Those kind of issues. So what is it that's stopping you? That's valid and appropriate conversation to have in terms of planning for this eventual driving retirement and really understanding the risk. Again, it's not just about the person. It's potentially about other people. I've seen a lot of wonderful human beings that never, ever, ever would have wanted to get to a point where they injured another person. So part of that is respecting the honor and philosophy and spirit of the person prior to the cognitive impairment. There is some liability for family members, especially those of you who have durable power of attorney or guardianships. When there's documentation of an impairment, and especially if there's documentation of a recommendation to end driving. If there have been providers who have said to you, you should not be driving, that they're recommending driving retirement or driving evaluations that you are, or pausing driving until a driving evaluation, and something happens, you are at risk. And there have been a number of documented lawsuits around those situations. So if the provider, if your doctor, nurse practitioner, PA advises a driving evaluation, what does that mean? It really means a medically based driving evaluation. It does not mean the ARP driving program or just going to the DMV. We're really wanting to look at all of those elements that we talked about could impact safe driving. Visual spatial field, reaction time, response in novel situations, etc. And so these are programs listed here that have occupational therapists that assess the driving. In some cases, from a virtual standpoint, in most cases, both virtually and actually behind the wheel. So in the Kansas City Metro, we have Ability Kansas City in Midtown, and we have Avenues driving evaluation program at MedAmerica Rehab. KU does have a driving and mobility services program that is virtual only. And there are a couple of programs in Wichita and Topeka. At times, and I know is true currently of the Wichita program, is that they are paused because of staff changes. These are small programs, usually with singular or a few staff members. And so I know there are times these programs are paused, but these are options if that is recommended. Driving should be regularly assessed. So even if they are told they are safe, family still needs to be periodically driving with them, and conversations will continue to be checked in with providers. And oftentimes the driving evaluation programs, as well as the providers, will recommend repeat evaluations. Physicians can help in intervening. Sometimes it is overwhelming for families to take that on, and it's completely appropriate for providers to have those conversations with individuals about driving retirement. There is a guidebook from the NIH called At the Crossroads, and talks more about it. If you would like something to hang on to, you can order that free, download that free from the National Institute of Health. If someone is deemed safe, and there absolutely are times that people have driving evaluations and they are told they are safe, or providers themselves have enough information that they believe them to be safe, families believe them to be safe, but sometimes there are accommodations that are suggested. One of which is use of GPS when wayfinding becomes difficult. If if people are having trouble finding their way in familiar situations, that is a sign that they are unsafe and should not be driving. But there are individuals who are okay in familiar situations, but in going places that they frequent very rarely, or new places that they are going to maybe would struggle where they wouldn't have struggled before. GPS can be an option, but there's a caveat to that. For some people, it is distracting and it makes it worse. So if the person that you are supporting has some of those issues in new or infrequent situations and you want to try GPS, I would do it with you in the vehicle to see how that person responds to GPS instructions and how distracting that might be. Have a conversation about that. Sometimes accommodations mean no highway driving, and that others are double checking car care in a more conscientious way. Sometimes the instructions are defined parameters, can only go to familiar situations within such and such radius, only go to the store, only go to church, whatever. So sometimes there's parameters that are included. Again, back to limiting distraction, there'll be accommodations recommended, like no talking in the car, no radio. Sometimes it's just at certain times in the day, and rather visual cues and mechanisms to remind people to take their phone with them. Notes, for example, important that they have access to some assistance. So early conversation is important. I certainly have lots of conversations with people that are early, have early Alzheimer's disease. Important that they're part of that because driving retirement will happen at some point. And to engage in really what would that look like and when might that happen, not in terms of adding some kind of despair, but really allowing some of that anticipatory grief processing and figuring out what it might look like when that happens. And most specifically is to engage them in that decision. It is so much more therapeutic, so less traumatic when they themselves say, I don't think I should drive, or I need to quit driving. So the earlier conversations begin, say, there'll be a day and we're going to make this decision together, and here's what we're looking for, and to include providers and support folks in those conversations so people are prepared. Connect to specific brain changes rather than general comments. It's not just because you have MCI or Alzheimer's disease or whatever, but it's really about very specific changes. Again, people can have cognitive impairment, continue to drive in very mild states. And what we don't want that person to do is to generalize. So I'm not capable, et cetera, that we attach it to very specific things like visual spatial field. Relinquishing conversations should always be accompanied with replacing conversations. So it never, ever works to talk to someone about giving up driving without having part of that conversation dedicated to, we want you to go to the places you want to go to, and we're going to figure out how to keep you doing those things. The idea of sitting in the house trapped often is the word people will use, is the tough stuff. So, it's figuring out how do we replace driving with other transportation sources and mechanisms. And we need to include in that replacing, in that figuring out who's going to get this person places. We need to include what's important to that person in the schedule, not just where they need to go, natural flow. In other words, it's more than getting somebody to the doctor. It's more than getting somebody to the store. It's not just dropping off food. Sometimes them going to the store is more therapeutic for them than just having food dropped off. Maybe it's, going to the bridge game at church. Maybe it is, the men's coffee. Maybe it is fishing, whatever it is, but those things that they enjoy, because there'll be a natural inclination to not ask people to transport them, that they'll think they are a burden. And so they'll only ask when they have to. And then we end up with risk factors for depression. So you as support person, as care partner, you're part of the conversation to say, let's figure out what's important. We're going to figure out how to get you there on a more systematic basis so that somebody isn't constantly having to ask. Sometimes people are progressed in the disease when driving retirement happens, and there is not the insight and the logic and reasoning available to make that happen smoothly. And when that is the case, when the person themselves is unable to see the deficits and unwilling to give up the keys, then there needs to be certain strategies to deal with that. Many times you need a bad guy, and the bad guy can be the provider. Again, it kind of depends on the situation. We don't want it to be the provider that they trust the most and see the most, but can be a secondary provider that doesn't see them often, like neurology, or it can be a provider they're not going to follow with anymore. The bad guy can be a family member, but should not be the person, the primary caregiver. Shouldn't be the spouse. Shouldn't be the adult child that is the primary support. Maybe it's the person that lives out of town that comes in and has the conversation about no more driving. But the family needs to process and make decisions together about who that bad guy is and use those resources. Sometimes people are still at a point where direct conversation is possible. I know you disagree with this. This just is what the evaluation said we had to do. We don't have a choice. Again, focus on biology. If they are progressed in the disease, it's possible to disable the car. Sometimes families have to get rid of the car. The car is a visual cue and triggers repeated conversation about why can't I drive, and anger and frustration. Attend to where the keys are. Sometimes people put away keys and they are found in the midst of everything else that is lost. The car keys are found, and I have certainly worked with folks who found the keys and left and were lost for some period of time. And there have been cases where they were not found until a more traumatic ending. So attend to where the keys are. And if you're using the strategy of hiding the keys, make sure they are in a very secure place. Sometimes families will file down keys. So the person feels like they have keys, but if they try to use them, the car won't work. And again, make a plan, a systematic, structured plan for access to places that they normally would have gone, and maybe not everywhere, but all the important places. And you're going to think about informal and formal resources. What do I mean by that? Somebody else in the men's group that has coffee, somebody else at church that's willing just to swing by and get them for Sunday school, the neighbor who might be going to the store. And then sometimes it's formal supports. when people give up driving, typically they're still quite capable of many other things that they really don't need respite care per se. Again, it depends on when that driving retirement happens. But if it happens in the earlier stage, they really don't need direct support. But perhaps they do need somebody to transport and be what I consider an assistant. So think about that. And in fact, I think it works better to integrate that help earlier on than when more significant needs occur. So conversation starters, talking about safety of others. Sometimes it is about, traffic isn't what it used to be. People drive crazy out there now. There's so many people, the area has blossomed and there's so many people out there, talking about concerns about traffic incidences around you, understanding what their experience is with their own parents or others in their family when they had to stop driving, affirming that you're supportive of their decisions. I'm glad that you've cut down on night driving, but if really affirming the bravery of those choices, the courage, the strength in those decisions to alter their driving or stop driving. Putting it on medication sometimes is helpful. Have you talked to doctor about the effects of the medication? And then having a conversation about potential concerns of their own driving. That was a close call yesterday. I worry about your safety. I have had individuals in early stage say, my family says I shouldn't drive, but they really don't give me specifics. And I think it is important to include specifics. And again, it's back to that biology. I noticed some lane control, that is visual spatial field. It's not about you or flawed driving. It's really about these cognitive changes. All of that connects in terms of specificity as to why and connecting back to biology. And then we want to support them in feeling comfortable with using alternative transportation. There is pride and independence attached to driving. And again, very hard to ask for help, very hard to not be behind the wheel for some people. And so to celebrate that, Mary really wants to come pick you up. Come with me so you don't have to deal with the parking. We can really save lots of money if we get rid of one of these cars. I'll come pick you up because it gives us some special time to spend together. I'm wondering about the weather. Maybe it's best if I come get you, or the construction out there is ridiculous right now. Let me just come get you. So all of those things to kind of expand and to say, I'm making a decision based on a number of variables. Remember, the goal is ongoing connections and engagement. There is losses in this life, and driving is a tough one. But ultimately, it's not who's behind the wheel. It's about keeping them and you connected and engaged with others around you. As always, if there are questions, concerns, specific issues that you feel you would like to discuss or process, do not hesitate to let us know. We would certainly be glad to talk with you. Take good care, and we'll see you again.